here in Washington is Doug Brooks. He's the founder and president emeritus of the International Stability Operations Association, a leading private sector organization representing global security firms. Scott Horton is an attorney and human rights advocate. His current book is Lords of Secrecy, the National Security Elite and America's Stealth Foreign Policy. Also with us is Laura Dickinson. She's a Future of War Fellow with the New America Foundation's International Securities Program and a research law professor at George Washington University. Thanks to all of you for joining us. As we heard in our report, there's some interesting questions posed by our reporter. What's the future of private contractors? Can they be regulated? I will get to those in a moment, but Laura, first, let's look at the fact that there's been significant growth in the number of private contractors that are used by countries like the United States. We saw that most significantly in Iraq, in Afghanistan. Question is, why privatize?
Well, I think we saw that at the end of the Cold War, there was a huge pressure to downsize the U.S. military. And at the same time, we needed to maintain a strong footprint to maintain peace and security. So there was a tremendous push to outsource. And I think another important factor was the domestic politics of privatization, what I've called in my book the ideology of privatization, the faith that the private sector can do things better. Sometimes it can, but it can't always. And sometimes we turn to them in blind faith that we think they can do things better. And it's a huge shift now in how we project our power overseas, a radical change. And the big issue is that the legal framework that we designed was established in another era. And so there are real challenges for oversight and accountability.
Doug, what's your view on this? I mean, are military contractors a good thing? There are questions of how one regulates them.
Well, we always say if it's not faster, better, or cheaper, why would you use a contractor to do something the military can do? But I think in the United States, we've seen since the advent of the all-volunteer military, we want our military to be professional. When you join the military, you're not joining it to peel potatoes or, build things. Essentially, you're joining it to be a military person and carry out the policies of the government. And so I think the military's found that it is more convenient, that it makes more sense. You get more expertise when you outsource a lot of these tasks. The security part, again, is a very small part, as you pointed out. And I would also point out that it grows and shrinks depending on demand. So there was a lot of these contractors during the Iraq conflict, but then after that was over, then the numbers went down, the size of the market went down, and you had consolidation within the industry. So it grows and shrinks depending on demand. And you brought up World War II, and of course, World War II, you didn't have Reconstruction going on at the same time as the war. The Reconstruction came afterwards. Whereas in Iraq, also in the Balkans, you had reconstruction development projects going on during the conflict. So of course you had a lot of contractors there. The military doesn't normally build hospitals or things. It can, but it's better to outsource it.
Right. Scott, what's your view on private contractors? I mean, for instance, we saw what happened in Iraq in our report there.
That's right. I mean, I think in addition to the issues that have been laid out here by my two colleagues, public and political accountability is a huge issue that plays. So in the United States, in Western Europe, when the decision is made to send troops abroad, that's an enormous public issue that attracts attention, stimulates political debate. It creates a threshold, a political threshold that has to be consciously crossed before a decision is made. Now, contractors are used systematically, I think, to avoid exactly that sort of debate. And we repeatedly hear the same expression used here in Washington by President Obama and by his predecessor. That is, we're not going to put boots on the ground. Well, in the view of official Washington these days, using private contractors is not putting boots on the ground. They're a different sort of calculus that the public and the Congress don't need to be so concerned about and shouldn't be investigating so thoroughly. And I think that presents really fundamental issues about the way the government goes to war. It effectively lowers the threshold for involvement in hostilities.
Right, Laura, that's what we have here, a situation where political accountability is bypassed completely because the government can quite honestly say, we're not putting boots on the ground, as Scott just said, but they are, in fact. They're just doing it privately.
Well, political accountability is a problem, but so is legal accountability. And I think that it's clear from the Blackwater incident, but also many other incidents during the high water mark of the Iraq and Afghanistan conflict, that contractors were committing abuses with what seemed to be impunity. And that tarnished the US's reputation and its interests, and it also hurt the industry. So, for example, we now know that 85% of the contract interrogators working for the CIA, 85% of the interrogators were contractors. And many of the contractors were actually pushing government officials to commit abuses. On the other hand, it's not all the contractors that are running amok. Many contractors are doing their jobs well and even sacrificing their lives for the United States. I think we have data now that shows that 6,000 contractors, US citizen contractors, were killed in the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we have been making some steps towards greater accountability. It's just that it's not enough.
Doug, Laura raises an interesting point there, and that is accountability, legal accountability. Are contractors bound by the laws of war, the provisions of the laws of war, the Geneva Conventions, for instance?
That's a great debate. I think Scott can actually probably answer that one better than I can. I think there has to be laws and rules that apply to these contractors. In the case of the Blackwater contractors, they were tried under civil law, which I would argue makes more sense. They are civilians. You've left the military. Your rules that you operate under are very different. You should be tried as a civilian. So that makes more sense. Perfect accountability is not possible in the United States. It's even more difficult in a war zone, but there are things you can do to improve accountability, and it's stuff that the industry supported all along.
Right, and there are also issues of jurisdiction. I mean, does the United States have jurisdiction over what happens in Iraq or in Afghanistan?
In general, that's a great question. Yeah. I mean, in general, you are under the laws of the country that you're operating under. So the contractors in Afghanistan are operating under Afghan law. In the case of Iraq, initially the contractors were not under Iraqi law because there was a law of occupation.
Like to jump in because I think the Blackwater case really illustrates this. The recent convictions and sentencing of Blackwater guards is an important step for legal accountability, but it also shows the real problems. So the law that allows US courts to try contractors working for the US government overseas is riddled with loopholes. And it's very unclear whether contractors working for agencies other than the Defense Department.
Right.
So for example, the State Department contractors here are covered because the statute only covers contractors who are DoD contractors or whose employment relates to a DoD mission. This could even come up in this case.
And this is interesting because
right?
originally this is just a military, it's just DoD only, and then they tried to expand the law, and this is supported by the industry, to include Department of State and other departments if they were working in support of a DoD mission.
Scott,
but this is in fact the issue that's likely to come up now with Blackwater. So I think a lot of people are saying the chapter's closed, the convictions, the sentencing has occurred. Now we're going to see an appeal, and the appeal is going to focus not on questions of guilt or innocence with respect to the event. It's going to focus on the technical loopholes of jurisdiction. And I think, in fact, there were people in the Department of Justice saying at the outset of this case that we'll never succeed in establishing jurisdiction, therefore why should we prosecute them? So I know that this is not an easy or simple matter, but it's the responsibility of the United States, in fact. But you were asking at the beginning, do the laws of war apply? And the rules of international law on that score are very clear. That is, if a power fields a force, and it doesn't matter whether they're contractors or service personnel in uniform, that power is responsible for enforcing the laws of war with respect to that force. And it can pick the means of doing it, but it must do it. And the United States has said, well, we'll use these criminal law provisions under the Military Extraterritorial Jurisdiction Act to do it. But if that fails, it's the responsibility of the United States to ensure enforcement, and the failure will be a responsibility of the United States. I think almost every scholar who's looked at it has the same view, which is the United States has done an inexcusably weak job here. And there's got to be a basic question of whether that is an accident or by design.
Well, interestingly, there is a new law that's been drafted called the CEJA, Civilian Extraterritorial Jurisdiction Act, which is supposed to address these problems. This is a law, again, that has been supported by the industry,
Right.
but
Well,
it's still pending in Congress.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
this bill has been languishing on the Hill for 8 years. And it's really important for Congress to pass it because it would close these loopholes.
Right.
Without it,
Again, it makes sense for the industry.
yeah,
They're very
the
comfortable
industry
with it.
supports it,
Okay.
right? Because it's in the industry's interest to have accountability when there are real cases of abuse.
Okay.